Every human culture across all of time and, every geographical boundary has stood in front of a grave or a shroud and asked the same fundamental question.
Right.
Consciously or silently, they ask, is this the end or is it a door?
It's the ultimate human inquiry, and as you said, the philosophical stakes couldn't be higher. This is so much more than a biological question about cells shutting down.
It cuts right to the heart of everything.
It really does. It's about what we believe about ourselves, about justice, about consequence. When we talk about life after death, we're really asking if our personal identity continues, if our actions have, these ultimate eternal consequences.
And whether death is just darkness or a transition or maybe a return to something.
Exactly. All of the above are on the table.
So our mission today, for you, the learner, is not to settle this ancient, persistent question. That's far above our pay grade.
A little bit, yeah.
Instead, we're doing a deep dive. We're going to map the main ways that different religions, philosophies, and traditions have imagined the aftermath of death. And critically, what those compelling visions imply for how we should live our lives before we get to that door.
And to navigate this immense diversity of thought, we really have to establish our toolkit first. Because the phrase life after death sounds simple, but it's deceptively vague.
People mean very different things when they say it.
Fundamentally different things. So clarity is absolutely essential.
Okay, so we've broken down the source material into 5 core possibilities, and understanding this framework helps us categorize all these worldviews. The first one, and maybe the most intuitive for many listeners, is personal survival.
Right. This is the idea that the individual retains its memory and personal identity after the physical body dies.
So I'm still me.
You are still you. This is the classic model of heaven-hell resurrection, where Jane remains Jane, just in a different state of being.
So even some types of reincarnation could fit in here.
They could, yeah, especially the ones that say you have full memory of your past lives. The continuity of the ego is the key thing here.
All right, so what's the second concept?
The second one is a complete metaphysical pivot. It's called impersonal survival.
Impersonal. So the I doesn't survive.
Not in the way we think of it. This framework says that the deepest, truest reality of the self isn't the individual ego, but something much, much larger. The individual I just dissolves.
It merges back into a greater whole.
Exactly. Think of the concept of Brahman in some Hindu schools, where your individual soul, your Atman, realizes it was always part of this ultimate reality, or dissolving into a cosmic consciousness, or becoming one with the Tao.
So the essence returns, but my personal ego, my memories of this specific life, they vanish.
They vanish entirely.
That immediately raises a question for me about morality. I mean, if I just dissolve into the whole, is there still any accountability for the things I did in my life?
And that is precisely the challenge these traditions face. They solve it by redefining accountability. It's not about your individual eternal fate anymore. It might be about the immediate karmic consequences that ripple through the whole system. Or they argue that the illusion of the separate self was the source of all the suffering in the first place. So the goal isn't reward, it's release.
Release from that illusion. Okay. Moving on, the third major category is rebirth or reincarnation. How is this different from the personal survival we talked about?
It's distinct because while there's a kind of continuity, it's not usually with full memory. It's more like a new life is causally connected to the previous one. An energy or a causal chain continues, driven by momentum.
Got it. And the fourth?
The fourth one is entirely earthbound, and you don't need any spiritual belief for it. It's symbolic survival.
So this is about legacy.
Your legacy, your children, your influence, the impact of your actions or your art. It's the way you live on in the world after you're gone. Everyone seeks this, really, regardless of what they believe about a soul.
And finally, the fifth possibility is just nothing.
Simply no survival. This is the belief that consciousness is a property of the brain. When the brain stops, consciousness, memory, awareness, it all just ends completely.
This breakdown is so important for you, the listener, because when someone says they believe in life after death, they can mean any of these 5 things.
Or very often a blend of them. And that's why mapping this complexity is what we're here to do.
Okay, let's begin that journey. Let's look at the earliest stories, the visions humans created way back before these really sophisticated theological systems took hold.
Right, back to the ancient world. And when we look at these foundational civilizations, the afterlife was often, well, pretty grim.
Not a paradise, then.
Not at all. It was defined by its lack of vitality. It wasn't about reward or punishment. It was just the neutral, dim fate of every single mortal. It reflected this deep pessimism about humanity's power against the grave.
We see this so clearly in ancient Mesopotamia, right, in Babylonian mythology. The vision of the underworld, sometimes called Kur, was...
Utterly bleak. It was described as a dark, dusty place where the dead ate clay and dust. They wore clothes made of feathers. They were basically prisoners.
No sun, no light.
And very little agency. But what's really crucial here is how democratic it was. Kings and commoners, they all shared the same miserable fate. It wasn't a moral judgment. It was just the default setting for the human spirit after death.
And we see a similar idea in Homeric Greece, in the realm of Hades. When Odysseus visits the underworld, he sees the souls, the Such, as pale shades.
Weak reflections of their former selves. I mean, the famous story of Achilles just sums it up perfectly.
Right, he's the greatest hero of them all.
And even he says he'd rather be the lowliest servant to a poor farmer in the world of the living than be a king ruling over all the dead. All the strength, the passion, the wisdom of life was just leached away. They survived, sure, but at a terrible cost.
So the shared theme is this idea of reduction. The afterlife is a continuation, but it's a much worse version of life on Earth.
And it's neutral. But that neutrality is about to be shattered.
This is where it gets really interesting.
That's right. This brings us to a monumental shift, where the afterlife moves from being a passive fate to an active, morally charged process. This is the dawn of accountability.
And this shift toward a moral order is maybe most powerfully established in ancient Egypt with the concept of ma'at. This is where ethical living suddenly takes on cosmic stakes.
The Egyptian vision is incredibly detailed, it's potent, and it's utterly consequential. Unlike Mesopotamia, where everyone just suffered, the Egyptian system had this rigorous moral accounting that determined your fate.
And all centered on the heart.
The heart of the deceased, yes. It represented their conscience and all the deeds of their life.
So tell us about the judgment process, because the imagery is just indelible. It wasn't subjective. It was measured, literally.
It was the famous weighing of the heart. The deceased person would stand before the god Osiris in the Hall of Two Truths. Their heart was placed on one side of a great scale.
And on the other side?
On the other side sat the feather of Mahat, the symbol of truth, justice, and cosmic order. Your entire life was being literally weighed in the balance.
And the consequences were, well, dramatic.
Absolutely. If your heart was heavy with wrongdoing, if it tipped the scales against that feather of truth, it was immediately devoured by a monstrous goddess named Amet.
And this was called the second death.
Second death. The complete annihilation of your soul. Your chance at eternity was just erased.
But if your heart was light?
If it balanced perfectly with the feather, you were declared true of voice, and you were admitted into a blessed afterlife, the field of reeds.
Which was like a perfect version of Egypt.
An idealized Nile Valley, exactly. A place of eternal comfort. The genius of this Egyptian vision is that it established a principle that would just echo through history. How you live determines what happens after you die.
The afterlife is no longer a neutral dust heap. It's a moral landscape.
Your earthly ethics dictate your eternal destination. And that idea, that accountability, is the foundation for almost every major tradition that followed.
So from that feather of justice, we move into the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, where life after death becomes inextricably linked not just to ethics, but to divine justice, covenant, and resurrection.
Right, the stakes become truly monumental here. The Abrahamic faiths shift the whole landscape. It moves from an impersonal cosmic order to a direct, personal relationship with a single sovereign God.
And your fate is centered on that relationship.
Entirely. On that relationship and the moral choices you make within it, all culminating in a final eternal accounting.
Let's start with the Jewish perspectives, because they're fascinating. The whole concept of the afterlife really evolved over millennia.
That evolutionary perspective is so important to understand. The early biblical texts mostly talk about Sheol.
Which was a bit like those earlier underworlds we discussed.
It was, initially. It was seen as a shadowy pit or grave, a collective home for the dead, where there wasn't much personal judgment or interaction with God. The real religious focus was on the covenant with God in this world.
On blessings and curses happening in life. So if the focus was so much on this world, where did the idea of eternal reward and punishment come from?
It developed gradually, especially during and after periods of intense persecution and exile. The community was struggling with this huge problem of injustice. Why do the righteous suffer while the wicked prosper?
The problem of theodicy.
Theodicy, yes. It became theologically necessary to propose a future reckoning, a time when all those accounts would be settled. And this led to the concept of the resurrection of the dead and the world to come, or Olam Haba.
So resurrection was a promise of ultimate justice.
Precisamente. It guaranteed that meaning and justice would finally be fulfilled. Often, it was imagined as a future state where the resurrected righteous would live on a restored, perfected physical earth. The main focus is still on faithfulness in this life, but that future life serves as the backdrop that guarantees it all has meaning.
Okay, moving to the Christian emphasis. We find a profound distinction, and it's all centered on the life and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Yes, and this tradition puts a very strong emphasis on the resurrection of the body, not just an immortal soul.
That's a key difference from, say, Greek philosophy.
A huge difference. The theological necessity for a bodily resurrection is profound. It implies that the material world, the physical creation, is fundamentally good. Human fulfillment isn't about escaping the body, it's about having it restored and perfected.
The spiritual and the material are reconciled?
They are. And this leads to the judgment and destinations. We see three major concepts in Christian tradition: heaven, hell, and in some traditions, purgatory.
Right.
The final judgment is the culmination to everything. Heaven is defined as eternal, perfect communion with God. It's often called the beatific vision, where knowledge and love are perfected.
And hell.
Hell is the ultimate separation from God, a state of definitive, irreversible non-communion.
But then you have these intermediate ideas, especially in Catholic and Orthodox traditions, which seem to reflect a need for some kind of purification.
And that's where purgatory comes in. It's a state that acknowledges that many souls might die in a state of grace, but they're not yet perfectly purified to enter directly into heaven.
So it's a cleansing process.
It's an intermediate state of necessary cleansing. And the key difference from hell is that purgatory is temporary, and it always leads to heaven. It's not eternal condemnation.
So for many Christians, death isn't the end, it's a doorway. But a doorway with immense gravity, where your choices have eternal weight.
And that sense of detailed structure and accountability, it reaches a real height in Islamic teachings. They provide these highly structured, very precise visions of the soul's journey after death.
Islam introduces a very specific intermediate concept that happens right after death, the barzakh.
The barzakh is the isthmus, or the barrier between this life and the next. It's the state the soul enters immediately. It's often called the life in the grave.
And what happens there?
During this time, the soul is questioned by two angels, Munkar and Nakir, and it begins to feel a taste of either the blessings or the punishments that await, based on its life. It's a period of intense anticipation.
Before the final event, which is the final day of judgment, Yom al-Qiyamah.
On that day, the earth will be split open, and all beings, humans and jinn, are resurrected, body and soul, and judged individually by God. The judgment is meticulous. Your complete record of deeds is presented.
And this leads to the ultimate permanent destinations: paradise, Jannah, and hell, Jahannam.
Right. And Jannah, paradise, is described with this incredible sensory imagery. Flowing rivers of water, milk, honey, and wine that doesn't intoxicate. Luscious gardens, eternal youth. It's a place where every desire is fulfilled, symbolizing perfect closeness to God.
And Jahannam.
Hell, Jahannam, is a horrific, fiery place. Scalding wind, boiling water, just agonizing physical and spiritual pain, characterized by the ultimate separation from God's mercy.
But the sources also note that while these images are really rich, the ultimate reality of Jannah and Jahannam is beyond human language.
It transcends our comprehension. They are eternal states that fulfill divine justice and mercy. And that really is the summary of the Abrahamic worldview: birth, life, death, judgment, and then eternity, all connected to moral responsibility.
Okay, let's move now to the East, to the great spiritual systems that originated in India. Here, the entire scale just changes completely. Life after death isn't a one-time event leading to a fixed destination.
No, it's part of a vast, repeating spiritual journey across endless cycles of time.
That changes everything.
It really does. The Indian traditions introduce cosmic time and repeated personal existence, so the challenge shifts. It's not about passing a single life's test anymore. It's about achieving liberation from the cycle itself, which can take millions of lifetimes.
So let's start with Hinduism and its core mechanism, samsara.
Samsara is the ceaseless cycle of death and rebirth or transmigration. The individual self, the Atman, which is the soul or essential self, is trapped in this cycle, moving from one body to the next.
An almost infinite number of chances for growth.
Exactly. And the engine that drives this whole cycle of samsara is karma.
We hear that word all the time, but what does it mean in this specific framework? How does it work?
Karma literally just means action. It's not divine punishment or reward. It's more like an automatic moral physics of the universe.
Like a causal relationship.
A fundamental causal relationship. Every action, every thought, every word creates an imprint or a reaction. And that reaction, that karma, shapes the conditions of your future births.
So good actions lead to better births.
Good actions, driven by pure intention, lead to favorable births. Negative actions, driven by ignorance or greed, lead to unfavorable ones. And intention is really key here.
So the thought behind the action matters more than the outcome.
In many schools, yes. The intent is often more consequential than the physical act itself. It's the conditioning of the mind that is most crucial for what comes next.
So if the cycle is endless, what's the ultimate goal? It can't just be to get a better life next time.
That's right. The ultimate goal is moksha. Moksha is liberation. It's the release from the endless cycle of samsara.
And how is that achieved?
It's achieved when the Atman, the soul, finally realizes its true nature and achieves union with the ultimate formless reality, Brahman. It's the final realization that the separate self was an illusion all along.
So your choices today are seeds planted for an existence that might be thousands of years away.
But is immediately linked to your current soul. Now, this brings us to one of the deepest intellectual challenges in the source material. Buddhism.
Right, because Buddhism has this concept of anatta, the doctrine of no self or no permanent soul.
Exactly, and yet it still teaches rebirth. So how can something that doesn't have a permanent soul be reborn? It's a philosophical paradox.
So if there's no static I being transferred from one life to the next, what is the mechanism of continuity?
It's often explained with some powerful analogies. One of the most common is lighting one candle from another.
Okay.
The flame that passes from the first candle to the second. It's not the same flame, but it's not entirely different either. Second flame is causally dependent on the first, but the substance is changed.
So it's the passing of a pattern, an energy.
A momentum, yes. It's the consciousness stream, conditioned by karma and attachment, that fuels the next life. And that karmic energy dictates which realm of existence you're born into.
And there are many of those. Human, animal.
Heavenly realms, hellish states, but they are all temporary. Even a life in a heavenly realm is just a very good birth that will eventually end, pulling you back onto the wheel of samsara.
And all of that suffering, even in the good parts, is what necessitates the ultimate goal, which is nirvana.
Right. And nirvana is often misunderstood. It's not a happy place you go to. The sources are clear. It's not a destination. It's a state of being.
It's the complete extinguishing of the three fires.
The fires of greed, hatred, and ignorance. When those attachments and delusions are finally extinguished, the karmic fuel that drives the engine of rebirth just runs out.
So liberation isn't about preserving the ego, it's about ending the illusions that create it.
Exactly. And we should also briefly mention Jainism, which has another fascinating twist on this. Jainism also says every living being has a soul, a jiva. But this soul is physically weighed down by these subtle particles of karma that you accumulate through action. Like the soul is covered in spiritual mud.
And the path to purity is
achieved through extreme nonviolence, ahimsa, and rigorous ascetic discipline, which physically cleanses the soul of that karmic matter. Once it's cleansed, the soul is now weightless, and it rises to the very top of the universe to a state of eternal perfection beyond rebirth.
Wow. So across Hindu moksha, Buddhist nirvana, and Jain purity, the theme is clear. Life is linked to ethical responsibility across vast cyclical timeframes, and liberation is the final goal.
That's the unifying thread.
We're going to pivot again now. We're moving from these cosmic cycles to traditions that are focused much more intensely on immediate social continuity, on the family. And then we'll strip away the religious narratives and just look at the pure philosophical debate.
This really grounds the discussion in community and social obligation, where the dead are still, in a way, participants in the life of the living.
And in the East Asian focus, in Confucian, Taoist, and folk traditions, the whole concept of life after death is less about the geography of the afterlife and much more about the stability and harmony of the family unit.
Ancestor veneration is the central mechanism here. In cultures that are deeply influenced by Confucianism, the dead aren't just remembered. They're actively integrated into the household through rituals and ancestral tablets.
They're seen as part of the family hierarchy.
An active part. They are believed to be capable of granting blessings, or, if they're neglected, causing misfortune.
So your own survival is tied to the memory and actions of your living descendants. What are the specific rituals that ensure that survival?
The crucial obligation is providing ongoing offerings, food, drink, incense, usually at an ancestral tablet or altar. The ancestor needs this veneration to be comfortable and influential in the spirit world.
And if you fail to do that?
It's disastrous. The ancestor could become a neglected, maybe even a vengeful ghost, threatening the family's fortune and continuity. So your survival is fundamentally tied to the moral order of society. If you live a good life, your descendants will honor you, and that guarantees your survival.
And we also have to touch on the unique dimension of Taoism.
Right, because philosophical Taoism, which is different from the folk traditions, sometimes includes these quests for radical physical longevity or even immortality. The goal is to transform the body into an eternal, ethereal state and ultimately unite with the Tao, the fundamental pattern of the universe.
So this whole East Asian perspective is framed around balance, social and cosmic balance. The individual's fate is secondary to that harmony.
Now let's discard all the religious texts for a moment and just look at the philosophical arguments for and against survival, relying only on human reason and observation.
Okay, a pure debate. Let's start with the philosophical arguments for survival. These seem to be rooted in our deep intuitions about morality and consciousness.
The first major argument is about the moral imperative. This is a really powerful, long-standing idea, explored deeply by thinkers like Immanuel Kant. The argument basically suggests that our innate, universal sense of moral order implies that an afterlife must exist to ensure ultimate justice.
How does Kant make that connection between morality and an afterlife?
Well, he argued that for moral action to be rational, there has to be a proportionate outcome. Virtue must eventually be rewarded with happiness.
But that often doesn't happen in this life.
It often diverges drastically. The wicked prosper, the innocent suffer. So there must be some mechanism for an ultimate reconciliation. He called it the summum bonum, the highest good. And for him, the existence of God and the immortality of the soul were necessary postulates to make a moral life meaningful.
And the second argument focuses on consciousness and identity.
This is the classic mind-body dualism argument. It suggests that consciousness, rationality, self-awareness, they have qualities like unity and indivisibility that can't be purely reduced to the physical brain.
So if the mind is non-physical,
then physical death, which only destroys the material body, might not destroy that essential identity.
it suggests a possibility, but not proof. What about empirical hints?
Well, arguments often point to hints and signs. Things like mystical experiences, deep meditation states, or near-death experiences as suggestive evidence that reality is broader than our physical perception allows. They're not proofs, but they're data points.
But we have to look at the powerful counter-arguments, the philosophical arguments for finality. These are rooted in materialism and scientific observation.
The core of the materialist argument is scientifically focused. Consciousness depends entirely on the brain. We observe that every known aspect of consciousness, memory, personality, perception, is localized to and affected by specific physical brain structures.
So the mind isn't a passenger in the body, it's a function of the hardware.
Precisely. If we accept the scientific consensus that the mind is an emergent property of the brain, the conclusion follows. When the brain stops functioning, the emergent property consciousness ends. We have zero evidence of a mind operating independently of its physical hardware.
And coupled with that is the argument about the lack of evidence.
Right. The lack of any solid, verifiable, testable evidence that personal awareness continues after clinical death. It puts the burden of proof squarely on those who claim there is survival. Empiricism says that without evidence, the simplest answer is that existence ends.
And this brings us to the Epicurean stance, which tackles not just the possibility of an afterlife, but our fear of death itself.
Epicurus was focused on achieving tranquility in this life, and his famous argument just eliminates the fear of death by eliminating death as a perceivable event. He said, when we exist, death is not. When death exists, we are not.
It's a devastatingly simple piece of logic.
It is. If death is the complete end of the subject, then there's no me left to experience being dead. So death cannot be suffered, and it's irrational to fear it.
The implication is profound. If death is final, we should focus all our energy on maximizing our enjoyment, meaning, and virtue now, free from the worry of what comes next. So modern science and medicine have intersected with this ancient debate, not by solving it, but by generating a whole new set of data points and new layers of interpretation that both sides, the dualists and the materialists, use very vigorously.
This brings us right to the boundaries of life itself.
Yeah.
We're looking at phenomena that happen at the collision point between the medical and metaphysical.
We're talking about near-death experiences or NDEs and end-of-life visions. Thanks to modern resuscitation techniques, we now have thousands of reports from people who were clinically dead, often during cardiac arrest, who then come back and report these coherent, structured experiences.
And the common elements are hard to ignore. Traveling through a tunnel, seeing a brilliant light, feeling profound peace, and having these out-of-body sensations where they report observing their own resuscitation with startling accuracy.
And related to this are the end-of-life visions.
Yes, dying people, sometimes just before death, report these clear encounters with deceased relatives or meaningful, comforting images that no one else in the room can see. And it often seems to give them a profound sense of calm.
Naturally, these extraordinary phenomena lead to two very strong opposing interpretations. We have to look at both impartially.
Absolutely. On one side, you have the survivalist view.
This view argues that NDEs are compelling evidence that consciousness can and does separate from the body.
Right. Proponents point to the lucidity, the complex thoughts that people report having when their brain should technically be too impaired from lack of oxygen or blood flow to produce anything like that. The mind, they suggest, is operating independently while the hardware is offline.
And the counter-argument.
The materialist view posits that these are entirely brain-generated phenomena. They argue they're the result of extreme physiological stress, like cerebral anoxia, lack of oxygen, which we know can cause hallucinations and tunnel vision.
They also point to neurochemicals like endorphins or maybe endogenous DMT released during extreme stress.
Exactly. Things that can create feelings of bliss and separation. They argue that the brain, as it's shutting down, is creating these vivid, sometimes comforting narratives as a kind of biological defense mechanism.
What's so fascinating is that both sides are using science, neuroscience, clinical reports to support their claims.
They are. Which brings us squarely to the limit of scientific inquiry. Science is excellent in studying correlations. It can measure brain activity, it can correlate NDE reports with neurological states.
But there's a firm metaphysical wall that science can't easily get past.
Right. Science can only study consciousness when it's active. The fundamental question, does any part of us, our identity, our awareness, continue when brain activity has permanently ceased, beyond any hope of resuscitation?
That's ultimately beyond the scope of our current empirical methods.
The investigation has to end when the patient can't be revived. So NDEs give us this incredible, tantalizing data about the brain at the edge of death, but they can't definitively confirm or deny existence beyond that edge.
The answer remains, as it has for millennia, metaphysical.
It does.
So we started by mapping these profound and diverse visions of the afterlife, and now we arrive at the central takeaway for you, the learner. The truth is, whatever belief system we lean toward, whether it's a great religion, a spiritual path, or a purely materialist philosophy, it profoundly shapes how we navigate this life.
The visions of the future are essentially mirrors.
Yeah.
They reflect the ethical demands and the moral organization of the present. The need for an afterlife is really the need for meaning.
So first, if you believe in the Abrahamic path of heaven and hell, this linear judgment, then this life is seen as a test or a preparation.
And your actions now carry infinite weight. It intensifies the gravity of every single moral choice you make because failure is eternal.
Second, if you believe in reincarnation and these vast cycles, the pressure is kind of removed from the single test of this one life.
But ethical responsibility is actually broadened. Today's actions are seeds you're planting for future lives. It demands this conscious ethical cultivation that stretches across millennia. The consequences are deep, even if they're not immediate.
And third, if you believe that death is absolute finality, then the value of this one life often intensifies dramatically.
There are no cosmic corrections, no second chances. All meaning, all love, all creation, all action has to be found and done now. It makes this present existence infinitely precious.
What's really fascinating, though, is what the sources call the paradox of belief.
Yes, both conviction and non-conviction can lead to completely opposite behaviors. It's not the belief system that determines the outcome, it's how the individual uses that belief.
So, for example, someone who believes intensely in the afterlife could focus so heavily on the next world that they neglect this one, a kind of spiritual escapism.
But another believer, with that exact same conviction and ultimate justice, could use it to commit themselves deeply to care and ethical action in this world, using this life as their proving ground.
And the same is true for non-believers.
Exactly. Some, facing finality, might fall into despair or nihilism. If nothing matters eternally, then nothing matters now. But many others find that a finite life is, paradoxically, more precious and meaningful. The scarcity of time amplifies the importance of joy and leaving a positive legacy.
So our final synthesis, looking across millennia of human inquiry, is that death is clearly not just a biological event. It is the necessary philosophical and spiritual question about what it means to be human.
The human answers vary enormously. Eternal communion, merging with the absolute liberation or just vanishing, but the underlying impulse is always the same, to define mortality in a way that gives purpose and structure to life. These incredibly complex systems were ultimately created to help us live a moral and meaningful life on Earth.
So we leave you, the learner, with this provocative thought to consider, built on all the paths we've just mapped.
If all of these diverse, deep, and complex systems of belief share the common function of imposing an ethical framework on human behavior, whether it's through the threat of a devouring heart, the necessity of reincarnation, or the finality of the grave, does the specific mechanism of the afterlife, whether it's resurrection or rebirth or just non-existence, matter as much as the ethical responsibility they instill? What truly matters if everything we are and do is touched by mortality?